The particles you see on the screen weren't made with physics simulations. It's a new texture-based approach for simulating dynamic motion of particles without using physics and other computationally expensive methods. I released this generator a few weeks ago on my Gumroad page, where I included a manual explaining each setting. However, I thought it would be helpful to create a dedicated tutorial to show you how to use the generator effectively, where and how to get it, and how to append it to your Blender projects. So after downloading the particle generator Blender file, you will open a new Blender project. First, we need to append the particle generator to this current Blender project. So go to the top left corner and click on File, and then click Append. Now you will find the particle generator file you downloaded. And once you find it, double click on that file, go to the Node 3 folder, select the particle generator and click on Append. The generator is now imported, but you might want to have it by default, so whenever you open a new project, you don't have to repeat this importing process over and over again. So again, go to File and click on Save Startup File. This will override the default scene with the current project with the imported generator, so each time you open a new Blender project, it will automatically be available in the Geometry Node editor. Now let's take a look at how to add this generator to any object. Because it's Geometry Node based, the first thing you need is an object to which you apply the generator on. You can use the default cube, or you can use whatever object you want. Now select the object, go to modifiers, and add geometry node modifier first. Then, after clicking on this small node icon, you will select the particle generator. And this is how you add a particle generator node to your object. So now let's take a look at how it works and how to use it. All you need to care about are these two nodes, particularly this green node, where you can find all the settings that you can control to adjust the appearance and behavior of the particles produced by this generator. Let's get over the settings in the particle settings panel. These are the general settings that mostly affect the appearance of the particles. The particle density slider basically controls the number of particles generated inside the mesh boundary. If you increase the particle density slider, you will also increase the amount of particles, but be careful because you can easily overload your computer to the point where it can crash. The more particles you use, the slower the performance will be, which is common sense, but I still think it's useful to remind this from time to time. The particle radius controls the scale of the individual particles divided by 2, because you are scaling the radius, not the diameter. By the way, if you find any of these settings to be very sensitive, you can hold Shift before you increase or decrease the value. The random scale slider will randomize the particle scale for all particles individually. It has a minimum and maximum value, so if you keep it at 0, it will have no effect on the particles, and if you set it to 1, you will get the highest particle scale variation. The smooth shading will shade smooth the particle object, and the seed will basically create different variations of how the particles are distributed inside the object's boundary. Let's take a look at the custom particle settings. Now, if you are not using any custom particle object, the generator will use the default sphere particle, which might be useful for some simple scenes, but for a more realistic render, I recommend using the custom particle option, which you can also use here if you enable it. There are some custom particles included with this generator as well, but I will talk about that later in this video. When this option is checked, the generator will switch the default sphere particle with the custom particle object connected to the socket below. So if you want to use a custom particle object, just check this option and select the particle object in the object info node. The scale slider will basically scale the custom particles, and again, the smooth shading option will shade smooth the particles if enabled. Now let's move on to the animation panel. There are movement controllers for each axis that you can use to animate the particles. You can use them all together. If you want the particles to move in a specific direction, the directions are matching with the axis. So if you want the particles to move in the negative x direction, you will increase the number in the opposite direction. Now in the earlier version, if you wanted to make the animation long, you had to scale the object on the same axis in which the particles were moving, which I quickly realized was super inefficient. So I used the generation method in a way that you will never run out of particles, because old particles will disappear while new ones are generated on the other side, which is a far more useful and efficient method. There is one minor issue, which is that some particles disappear before they reach the end of the boundary, but I will fix that in the upcoming updates. Let's move on to the random motion panel. Right now we have the movement, but the issue is that all particles are moving evenly with the same rotation, which of course looks too artificial, and that's where the random motion panel takes place. First of all, there is this influence factor, which controls how much influence the following random motion settings has on the overall particle movement. If it's set to 0, the setting have no influence, and when it's set to 1, the influence is fully affecting the movement. This is one of the settings that can make the boundary shape completely irrelevant. So if you want to maintain the boundary shape, just keep the settings very low. The W slider underneath controls the random motion that acts independently from the animation panel. This is ideal if you want to, for example, animate fireflies or other small scattered objects that need subtle, unpredictable movement. It's very cool when you combine it with the directional movement, because it adds variation to the overall motion. The W multiplier basically multiplies the W value. This setting might be useful if you are working with large scenes where the influence becomes minimal. The scale basically affects the texture, which is the source of the random motion. Now, this one is a bit tricky because as you scale the texture, the random motion area will be lower, but if you scale the texture down, the intensity will go up and the movement will be more dynamic and fluent because there will be more particles moving in the same direction. Lastly, there is a random rotation factor which will randomize the rotation of every individual particle, and it is the only setting from this panel that does not fall under the influence factor, which means that even if you set the influence of the random motion to 0, it won't affect the rotation. Now let's talk about waves. If you want to create a blizzard motion or simulate underwater particles, this setting has you covered. Again, it has an influence factor that controls the intensity of the wave motion, so if you want to use the full power of the wave motion, you should always keep the influence on 1, but if you don't, then just keep it on 0. The W slider does exactly the same thing as the previous W slider, which randomizes the motion through the wave pattern, which can be again scaled by the scale slider. The last panel contains only one slot that you can use to change the material of your current particle object. Make sure that every time you switch the particle object, you also switch the material that comes with it, otherwise you will have particles with incorrect materials. So let's summarize it again. The mesh input serves as a particle boundary, the particle system controls the general settings and the appearance, custom particle enables you to add and adjust custom particle objects, the animation panel controls the basic movement of all particles, and the random motion will randomize the movement and rotation of all particles. The waves panel adds wave wind-like motion, and the material panel allows you to change the particle material. Now let's take a look at the custom particles that come with this Blender project. There are 12 custom particles for different simulations and environments. You can simulate fireflies, snow blizzards, falling leaves, snowstorms, rain, bubbles, sparks, or sandstorms. To use them, just select them in the object info node and set the material that can be found under the same names as the particles. So if you want to import the generator with these custom particles, you need to also append the custom particles collection. Now when you know how to use this generator, you can get it on my Gumroad, and you can go there by clicking on the link that just appeared or by clicking on the link in the description under this video. I will keep updating the particle generator from time to time, but the price will also go up, so if you get the generator now, you will get it for a lower price and free upcoming updates. That's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.